Good day, and welcome to the 6th episode of the For the Win Force Technique Workshop. My name is Gabriel Quenville, and I am the reconditioning specialist for the Canadian Armed Forces out here at Base 4 Wing Cold Lake. Today, we'll be talking about how to improve on the sandbag lift component of the force test. If you haven't seen the other 5 episodes on how to improve on the rushes, they'll be linked in the description below, so go ahead and check those out. Today, what we'll be focusing on primarily is really truly understanding how the protocol is written and how to improve our efficiency within the protocol. Stay tuned. The first tip we have for you today is understanding how high you actually need to lift the sandbag. As per the protocol, the center of the sandbag must meet the intersecting line. We recommend that you lift the sandbag straight up so that there's no change in the orientation of the bag. Therefore, if you're lifting it up like this, the center of the bag is right here at the seam. If the seam does not meet the intersecting line, but the bag does, it's still not a good lift. You need to make sure that that seam is always hitting the intersecting line. Let's say you happen to flip it so that it's sideways. Well, now this handle is the center of the sandbag, and that handle must meet the intersection of the two lines. What we recommend is to always aim for slightly above what you think is the intersecting line. There's always going to be room for human error when the evaluator is looking at you, especially if you're moving very quickly. And it's better to be safe than to be sorry. That extra centimeter or two can save you significant time if you're having to redo your lifts because the evaluator counted a lift as a no lift. So our recommendation, always aim for slightly above that intersection line and you should be good to go. Our second tip for you today has to do with your foot positioning. Your feet must be straddling the line that is on the floor. However, it doesn't specify how your feet need to straddle it. Therefore, your left foot must be on the left side of the line and your right foot must be on the right side of the line. You don't have to have your body directly in the center of the line. So, if my left foot is directly on the line here, if my body is right in the center of the line, or if my right foot is straddling the line here, those are all good, so long as my foot is not touching that line. That includes my heel, so if my feet are pigeon-toed out, or my toes if my feet are penguin-toed in. Our recommendation is to have your feet straight forward. Make sure that when you're lifting on the right side, your right foot is right beside that line, and as you switch over to the other side, your left foot just comes directly onto the other side of that line. So you're just doing these little side steps, side to side, without having to travel side to side as far as you would otherwise. Our third recommendation comes with how we hold the sandbag. It can be extremely frustrating when you're going very fast, you're having a great time, and all of a sudden one sandbag just slips out of your hand. And we know what happens when your sandbag slips out of your hand. If it goes vertical, well, it needs to go completely over that line, and that's going to add a lot of time. So, how can we avoid this as much as possible? Well, one, we can work on a grip strength, so try to do more training that involves grip strength and increasing that grip strength. The other thing is how we actually hold on to the sandbag. Make sure that you've clipped your nails before you do this so you don't catch the floor and end up with bloody fingers at the end of this test. But the first thing is the hand that's holding onto this side, let's have the underhand grip and really hold on to it tightly. As we come in on the other side, we can see that there's not as good of a hold here, and this is usually where the slip happens. So how we can avoid that is instead of just grabbing and lifting, we can actively squeeze inwards so that we're pressing our hands together and squeezing that bag. By squeezing that bag together, we can lift it up with a reasonably good chance that it won't slip out of our hands. Our fourth recommendation for the sandbag lift component of the force test is about timing. Timing is extremely important. There are only a select few amount of people who are able to do this test at maximal speed from the beginning of the test all the way to the end. If you're one of those people, keep doing what you're doing. That's fantastic work. However, for the majority of us, we're not able to do that. So we don't want to start sprinting right off the gate because then we're going to eventually hit a wall and slow down, and that's not going to be helpful for our time. What we want to do is find our threshold, that pace that we can hold for the entire 30 lifts, the maximal speed that we can do. What I encourage everyone to do is to go in and do the sandbag lift test with your training. How it's going to look is you're going to come in and do a warm-up, do 30 lifts, and then cool down. Have a partner time you every single 5 lifts, they hit the timer, and then compare your splits. Find the pace that you can hold consistently for all 30, and at the end, you felt like you couldn't go any faster. That is going to be your threshold for this test. Our goal is going to be to improve your threshold. So once you have your threshold established, start incorporating into your training program sandbag lifts, repetitions of 10. You can start with 3 sets of 10 with 1 minute rest in between, and over the next couple months, work your way up to 8 times 10 or 10 by 10 with a minute rest in between. Let's say your threshold is 1 minute for the 30 lifts. Well, then that means that your pace for 10 lifts is 20 seconds. Because we want to go faster, let's try to push that threshold a little bit in our training, and let's aim for 18 seconds, meaning that if we're able to improve our threshold from 20 seconds over 10 lifts to 18 seconds over 10 lifts, then our entire time will improve by 6 seconds if we're able to do that, and our new sandbag lift threshold for 30 lifts is 54 seconds. Once we have that, we can start working to improve even more and more. Maybe doing sets of 15s where your threshold is halved instead of divided by 3. In order to work on your timing, let's say you're someone that is not fit enough to go extremely fast from the beginning. I recommend doing these 3 things to ensure that you're staying within your threshold speed. The first one is your feet. So in order to go a little bit easier and maintain a nice, good, consistent pace, we want to do what's called the grapevine. Step behind, step across, step behind, step across. Making sure that we're doing this as we're going side to side and lifting up our sandbags. The next thing I want to focus on is your hand positioning and your body positioning. To go slower and to go at a nice comfortable pace that we can maintain and try to maintain our threshold pace, we want to stand up all the way, touch, let go, grapevine across. Down, lift, down, grapevine across. If we can just hold that steady pace and go relatively quickly, most people can do this in under 1 minute and 15 seconds using that technique at that pace. If we wanted to go a little bit faster, then these are the 3 tips that I have for you. As you're working on improving your threshold, you can switch from the grapevine step to the side shuffle, where you come in, touch your foot, and the other foot shifts across. The next thing that you can work on is your hand positioning. As I lift the bag and touch the wall at the intersecting line, instead of throwing the bag down, instead of lifting my hands up, what I'm going to do is touch the wall, not throw, or else it's going to be a no lift. I'm going to touch the wall, and as soon as I let go, my feet are shuffling to the side and my hands are coming down towards that next bag. My hands need to shoot directly for that bag. That's how I'm going to get a faster time. The next thing that I can work on to improve my speed is going to be keeping my chest moving laterally as little as possible, just like I'm doing with my legs. Remember, we're straddling the line just by a little bit every single time, and then switching our feet across. So what we recommend is at the beginning, while you're working on improving your threshold, do the grapevine, stand up all the way, and take a rest as you're stepping over to the other sandbag. Move at a nice consistent effort, and you'll hopefully be able to do it in under 1 minute 15 or 1 minute 20, so long as you have all clean lifts. As you are improving your threshold, switch from the grapevine to the side step shuffle. Switch from standing up all the way to staying low and using your arms a little bit more, and switch from throwing the bag down or lifting your hands up to shooting your hands directly to the sandbag that's next to be lifted up. So now let's see these techniques in action. I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do 10 lifts where every single time I straddle the line, I'm going to be in the center of the line. I'm going to lift the sandbag up all the way and stand up tall, touching the wall, and then I'm going to throw the sandbag down every single time. 3 common mistakes that people make. In the second one, I'm going to keep my foot straddling just a little bit so there's less lateral movement in my feet. I'm going to keep my chest down and I'm not going to straddle all the way across. As I lift up, I'm going to use my arms a little bit more to lift up that sandbag rather than standing all the way up. Staying low, touch, and then we're going to, instead of throw the sandbag down, just let go and move the hands over to the other side. And we'll see in real time why these recommendations really help improve your speed. All right, so here we have this side-by-side comparison. On this left side, I'm doing the faster technique, where my feet are going to stay relatively close to that line. And then the outer foot is going to be significantly further away from that line, so there's less lateral shuffle. My lifts are going to be the same height on both sides. They're just going to touch that intersecting line, but the difference is I'm going to be letting go of the sandbag and moving directly towards that next sandbag right away on this left screen. On this right screen, we'll see that my feet are going to be placed about the same distance from this line every single lift, so that my body is directly in the middle of that line. The next thing we'll also notice on this right screen over here is that I'm going to be standing up all the way so that my chest is going to be nice and tall up here, and I'm going to be throwing the sandbag down before I focus on going to the next sandbag. And that's really the part there that's going to be slowing me down the most. Full disclaimer, every single time the sandbag touches the ground, the camera shakes, so it's going to be a little bit shaky. The first thing I'm going to be doing here is going through a slow motion of the first lift, and then we'll watch 10 lifts continuously and see how much faster this left technique is going to be versus the right technique. So let's get started here. As we lift our first sandbag, we can see that sandbag touches the wall at relatively the same time, meaning the time taken to lift each sandbag is the same using both techniques. So we're not gaining any time from lifting the sandbag up. It's everything else that we're gaining time with. One way to increase your speed is to get stronger so that that lift from floor to wall is faster, but that's not what we're focusing on here. So what we're going to look at right here is we can see the body position on both sides is relatively the same. You can see that my legs are in this nice triangle formation here, up and down on both sides. Okay, as soon as I go to that next frame, pay attention to this left side and this right leg here. Oops, this right leg here. See what happens with this leg in comparison to this right frame over here. Okay, let's just forward just a little bit here, and look, that leg pivots. This other leg still hasn't pivoted. I'm still on this triangular frame here, whereas here I'm already working on moving towards this direction. That's one of the key advantages. As soon as this sandbag has touched that wall, I'm pivoting, I'm starting to move. I'm letting go of that sandbag and I'm moving over towards the left. On this right side, because I'm focusing on throwing that sandbag down, I'm not moving towards that left side just yet. I'm really just focusing on lift, throw down, and then move. 3 separate movements, whereas here it's 2, lift, move, lift, move. So let's keep going, and we can see here that I've already started jumping on this left side, and my hands are basically letting go of that sandbag and moving over in this direction. Whereas here on the right side, I haven't even lifted my feet off the ground yet. My hands are still on that sandbag. They're forcefully pushing that sandbag down. It's just wasted energy and wasted time. So that's where we're making up most of the time, and let's watch it in real time. From the beginning, We're going to go 3, 2, 1, and play. Watch the left side versus the right side. I do 10 lifts total in both of these. And you can see how I'm already one ahead on the left side. Right here, I've caught up and done. So on that left side, I finished 10 lifts by the time I did 7 lifts on this side. On the left side, you can see if you watch the entire 10, it was about 13 seconds multiplied by 3, that's 39 seconds, which is right around my best time. And on this right side here, if we finished off the final 2 lifts that were left, it would work its way to be about 18 seconds. If we multiply that by 3, that's 56 seconds total. That's a difference of 15 entire seconds. And I wasn't working any less hard on this right screen than I was on this left screen. It's really that technique that just makes me go that much faster. So if you take anything away from this, first work on improving your threshold and your fitness, and then work on improving your speed by doing the side step shuffle instead of the grapevine, by letting go of the sandbag instead of throwing that sandbag down, and by moving your momentum to the opposite sandbag as soon as that first sandbag touches the wall. Thank you and have a great day.
It's pretty evident that training with 2 sandbags and the proper grid lines on a wall and the floor is going to be the best ways that we can train to improve the sandbag lift component of the force test. However, this might not be accessible to everyone. So what I recommend is to start incorporating deadlift high pulls into your training plan as a muscular endurance type of training. The way you do this is grab any weight that you have accessible to you, whether it be a kettlebell, a dumbbell, a sandbag, a water jug, a backpack filled with weights. Maybe you have a barbell at home. Maybe you're fortunate enough to have a sandbag, but you don't have 2 or you don't have grids on the wall, whatever it may be. How we do our sumo deadlift high pulls is we start with a slight bend in the knees and we send the hips back. Common mistakes is to keep the pelvis tilted anteriorly. And what that does is it creates an excessive curvature of the lower spine, which adds pressure of the lower spine. So as we send our butt back, we want to make sure that that hip is tilted in. Other common mistake is reaching down with our shoulder, creating an excess curvature of the upper spine. So let's keep the shoulders retracted and keep that spine straight. As we bend down, we should feel our hamstrings get loaded. And we are allowed to bend the knees slightly to come down into this lower position so that our hips are higher than our knees. We're not coming down into a squat. We're coming down into this deadlift where the hamstrings are loaded. Grab your weight and explode up forcefully using your hips to drive that weight up high. Notice I'm doing a high pull. The high pull is your elbows ending up higher than your wrists. If you're coming in and doing this bicep curl where your elbows are lower than your wrists, then that's not the proper position for the deadlift high pull. The reason we recommend is the deadlift high pull is that when we do our sandbag lift, you want to lift up and into the wall like you would a deadlift high pull. Going up to the nipple line should be sufficient height. How to incorporate this into your training is to start with the 45-pound weight. If that's too heavy for you, start with a lighter weight and gradually build up. A good place to start would be 3 sets of 10 repetitions with 30 seconds to a minute rest. The rest should be minimal and the effort should be challenging by the end of the third. You shouldn't feel exhausted at the end of the first because the rest is going to be relatively short. As you progress throughout several weeks, start increasing the amount of sets, and you can get upwards to 8 sets of 10 reps or even 10 sets of 10 reps, keeping the same rest period of 30 seconds to a minute. Here, we can start adding more repetitions, doing sets of 15, sets of 20, or even sets of 30. By the time we get to this place, you may be able to lift heavier than 45 pounds. I wouldn't go significantly higher, but as we train with heavier weights, that 45-pound sandbag is actually going to feel lighter. And if you're sticking with the 45-pound bag or 45-pound dumbbell or whatever weight you're using, that should still be sufficient to help improve your fitness, so that when you do have access to those sandbags and to those grids, you can focus on improving your technique now that you have that fitness down, and hopefully your threshold is going to be much greater than it would have otherwise had you not have trained, even if you don't have access to the sandbags and to the lines. Hopefully this helped you out, and stay tuned for next week's episode.